Hi, I'm Wes Enos, and I'm an out founder, executive director of the Generations Project.
Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. And on this week's episode, we are welcoming Wes Enos, who is calling all the way from the Big Apple. So Wes, welcome to the show. Are you ready to inspire fellow Out Bosses?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Okay, so just a little bit about Wes before we jump into the questions. Wes is the founder and executive director of the Generations Project, which is a nonprofit based in New York City that preserves the history of the LGBTQ movement and promotes intergenerational support through storytelling. And while the organization is a charity, there is a bit of an overlap between starting a social enterprise, regardless of the tax structure, right? And given that most of our listeners run purpose-driven businesses, I just think that this is going to be a really great conversation to get a good sense to learn more about Wes and his organization and some of the challenges of starting up a nonprofit. So Wes, with that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the Generations Project and what makes it unique?
Yeah, well, I started the Generations Project because I moved to New York City after coming from a background of mixed with growing up in a small town on the Oregon coast to moving to a city like San Francisco for college and arriving to New York City in 2012 and seeing so many LGBTQ people here, but really feeling a lack of community, primarily because there's just so many people to really feel a sense of community, unlike San Francisco, which had like a Castro gay or LGBTQ neighborhood that really allowed you to feel like you were part of a community just by living in that neighborhood. And I just didn't really feel that in New York City. And I really wanted to learn more about the history of the LGBTQ movement. And I didn't really know any LGBTQ history or anyone really over the age of 50 when I moved here. So what I sought out to do was find a way to help bridge the gap between older and younger LGBTQ people. And what I found was through storytelling, it's a really incredible way to build community and also preserve the history of the LGBTQ community, or and by working with older adults to help them develop stories about specific decades or themes of their life. And that's really how it all started.
That's super powerful. And you're right. I think, being a member of the LGBT community for myself, it's, when I was coming out a while ago, let's say that, it just to try to find people throughout history, unless you're actively in the academy, and you're connected to this kind of research, it's not easily available, and I think the internet has definitely changed that for sure. So the work that you're doing is absolutely valuable, and just collecting individual stories of what life was like 10 years ago, 30 years ago, sometimes 75 years ago, right? And just being able to preserve that so that we have kind of more primary sources than what's available right now. And I'm curious, for the folks, when you were first introducing this project, how was it received? Especially thinking about those folks who are aging in our communities. Were people pretty forthcoming in sharing their stories, or did you find that you had to give some more background to build trust and rapport before people kind of opened up to you?
Well, I definitely had to build a lot of trust and just start making new friends. But, what's interesting is intergenerational storytelling exists in most communities, except in the LGBTQ community, primarily because our community has a history of not really having children. I know some of us do now, but unlike other communities, most communities are able to share their stories to the next generation because they're related to the next generation. So that was the driving force behind this. And then through that process, I learned how many older adults in the LGBTQ community, many of which who helped build the community, unfortunately feel invisible now and lacking platforms where their voices can be heard and respected. So I connected with a lot of people my age, and we came up with the idea of creating the Generations Project to pay homage to those who helped pave the path for us. And that's really been the passion behind the organization. And that's what's really allowed us to connect with older adults. And now we have storytellers of all ages at our events now. But during that beginning phase, it was really about finding ways to approach people like that. And there are a number of ways I would do that. And one would be I would just go to bars and start talking to older people. I was 27 at the time when I was starting this. So that was the first way, just to start making connections. And then the other, I was waiting tables at a restaurant that has existed for over 40 years. So it has a very long-lived clientele who are very beholden to the neighborhood in Brooklyn Heights. I started talking to them, and people would start suggesting certain people with really interesting stories. And yeah, that's really just kind of how it all started, and just wanting to create something that created a platform for older adults was what really resonated the most with people. And I think we all had a desire to hear that. Even the older people I met, who they're not even that old, they're in their 50s or 60s, they knew people in their 80s or 90s who are 80 or 90-year-old. And we would all be really interested to hear anyone 80 years old or older share a story on a stage. So it just kind of became really intergenerational in that regard, and a lot of outreach from people who wanted to become involved. And it worked in our favor to have it grow as a nonprofit, because then we could build a board of directors, really build a team of people who were passionate about building this community and getting our stories out there and told, and particularly told in front of live intergenerational audiences.
So talk to me a little bit about your process of story collection. So you're talking about this model of doing story collection live. Like what are the different methods that you use, and how do you ensure that you're hearing from, I mean, our communities are massive, right? And so there's lots of different voices, but how do you ensure that there's like a diversity of perspectives in the stories that you're sharing?
Yeah, so it's really important for our organization to be as intersectional as possible. For me, it really seems like the history of the LGBTQ movement will be intertwined with the history of intersectionality. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. So the recruitment process has been very interesting to see how it's grown. But what we're doing now is we're facilitating storytelling workshops at various LGBTQ senior centers around New York City.
Oh, cool.
And that's just allowing us to reach a larger audience. And through that process, we're also creating leadership positions in our organization for people from all walks of life, which really allows us to really connect with the many different facets of the LGBT community that make us really special. Mm-hmm. That's really the process. But not everyone, we often meet people who have never thought about sharing their story before or have resistance to it. So we also really value spending time with a lot of potential storytellers. And sometimes we spend up to a year or two with people before they actually share their story. So for us, it's actually a pleasure just to get to know people, and then with the goal in mind being having them share a story at one of our live events, hopefully in the future, or at the least attending the event.
So a question for you. So for folks that are listening to this podcast right now and they feel like, I have a compelling story, I've been in this movement for 40 years, or is it just centered around New York City at this point because you're doing kind of these physical, like in-person engagements, or are you casting a net pretty wide? Is this kind of a global movement that you ultimately envision with the nonprofit that you started, or kind of where are you going with the work, and how can people get involved to support it?
Yeah, well, so we're turning 4 this June, 2019.
Congratulations! Yes,
yay,
that's good.
So, we have slowly started to expand. Like, we've had a few events in San Francisco, and we have an annual show in Provincetown, Massachusetts. But we're really interested in taking this to other parts of the country and creating annual shows in other cities. But before we can do that, we really have to build a foundation here in New York City. And what we're doing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Stonewall coming up, which is this June of 2019 as well, is the Generations Project is building the Stonewall 50 time capsule. So within our organization, we have a lot of different types of programs, and one of them entails time capsule creation. And for to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, which happened in the year 1969, we're building a physical manifestation of the LGBTQ movement over the past 50 years that's primarily captured through our storytelling workshops and our live events, but also with do-it-yourself models, a do-it-yourself model for people or organizations or groups around the country who want to contribute something to put inside the Stonewall 50 time capsule. When, just to note, the Stonewall 50 time capsule will be stored here in New York City for 50 years at our local LGBTQ center in Manhattan until the 100th anniversary of Stonewall in the year 2069. So this is a pretty ambitious project, but we're really opening that door to anyone in the country to contact us on the generationsproject.org. And if they'd like to submit their story or learn more about us, they can do so through our website by asking for more information to get involved with the Stonewall 50 time capsule. And then I'll follow up with them from there with various ways they can contribute something or become involved. And hopefully through that process, we'll start to expand our network around the country. I mean, we live in New York City, so everyone here is sort of from somewhere else, or not everyone, of course, but a lot of people are. So it's really kind of an interesting place to start it and start expanding to a new city, maybe once a year or every other year, depending on how much we grow.
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing is really powerful. I have a few questions just related to, knowing this audience, which is largely LGBT business owners who love giving back. They're running purpose-driven businesses. So I'm curious, what does collaboration look like with your organization right now? Recognizing you're relatively new and you've been around for 4 years, so congratulations to that. Do you see a place where smaller businesses can support the work that you're doing, even if it's just getting the message out? And then also, kind of separate from the business community, how are other nonprofits showing up to support your work? Like immediately, like what comes to mind is NPR's StoryCorps. So I'm wondering, like, do you see, if it's not happening now, do you see a place where you are actually collaborating with like the NPRs of the world to kind of have a bigger reach eventually?
Yeah. So what we're doing now in New York City, as far as our collaborations are going, we're collaborating with local nonprofits such as SAGE, which is a network of LGBTQ senior centers or centers that cater to LGBTQ older adults. There are several centers around the country, but here in New York City, they have 5 centers. So that's one of our main collaborations. And then there's also this group called the Stonewall 50 Consortium, which has about maybe over 100 organizations a part of it. And the Generations Project has been in this group almost since it began. So we've really developed a lot of relationships with other organizations. So a lot of our events, we collaborate, and it's always better to host an event with another organization just because you get to merge. And that's really how a lot of our intersectionality really comes to life, is through these collaborations. And as far as businesses getting involved, our events are pretty well attended, and it's been really great to have businesses want to sponsor our events. So we can promote them on social media or at the event. We build like an LGBTQ timeline at all of our events. So how that works is it's magnetic, about 20 feet long. And I've collected over 500 newspaper clippings, movie quotes, any kind of LGBTQ historical moment from the 1920s to present day. As people enter, they pick something that happened the year that they were born and build this timeline. So there's also a way businesses are interested in sponsoring the timeline that's being built. We really love working with LGBTQ entrepreneurs. Most of our events have a raffle, and we really focus hard on using products of local LGBTQ entrepreneurs or sometimes authors of books to donate items to the raffle. We promote them during the event. And it's just kind of a fun little, it's a community space. We get about 100 to 200 people at our events, and they're typically free or any dollar donation to enter. So, people come and they like to see everything we're doing. And now we have like time capsules, like little projects at the events too. So our main incentive to work with businesses would be to get them involved with our events. We can promote their products and whatnot through our raffle. And yeah. And if there were any businesses like in other cities with LGBTQ presence in it, we would be really interested to figure out what it would take to help bring the Generations Project to that area. And on our end, we're pretty fortunate on our end to have really great flight benefits through our airline connections. So we get a lot of free flights to travel. We often, like last week, we went to Detroit for a Creating Change conference with 3,500 LGBTQ plus individuals from all over the country. And we were able to go with our small budget because we didn't have to pay for flights. So we're just really lucky in that regard, and we're ready to expand.
Yeah, so you heard it here first. So for small business owners, LGBT entrepreneurs, if you believe in this project, right, and you have a story to tell, of folks who have done incredible things in our movement that are kind of the unsung heroes of just keeping progress moving forward. And we'll share at the end of this program how to reach out to Wes and the Generations Project. Really thinking about, if you're an author, there's lots of authors who are here listening in, donating books or donating products or even services, right? Like that's a way to really show up and support this work. It's absolutely needed, unless you're in a state like California that mandates understanding LGBT history in school. So many folks broadly, especially for many of us LGBT folks, we don't have a full sense of our history and the contributions that we've made to the progress of humanity, right? So I think this kind of approach, while it's kind of like one starfish at a time, is really powerful because you really get to dig in deep and learn the stories of individual people doing incredible things. So Wes, like right now with this project, I mean, it's a nonprofit, totally passion driven. You've got a mission, but what is that one thing right now in the organization that has you most fired up?
Well, I didn't realize how much I love history when I was starting this. So I think just the need of preserving LGBTQ history. And I've worked with people or got to meet people through this project who were just absolutely incredible. And a few of them have passed away before they could ever share their story. And like, that's been really hard to experience, but knowing that their stories are in a way lost or just part of my memories now, or in the people who know them, and that they weren't really recorded. And it's just learning how much LGBTQ history has been lost for centuries. Mm-hmm. And being in this really exciting time where we can really preserve so much of it. And it's also being preserved in this unique way through social media and whatnot. But we don't know, we can't rely on that. And I think there's something really beautiful about filling a room with people of all ages to hear LGBTQ people of all ages share stories, but particularly those who have lived very, like, the longest in our community. And that, just creating that experience fires me up. Like, I'm just really excited to create those moments.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of concerns. Like, I come from a conservative small town in Southern Oregon, and I've been living in very liberal areas, San Francisco, New York City. So I just feel really passionate about finding a way to get to those more conservative areas, to find a way to bring this programming. In a way, I'm fired up about that because I need help getting there.
Yeah.
And it's just a slow process. So
that's the power of doing these kind of podcasts, right? Because we have listeners who are in pretty rural communities doing some really incredible work in business and really collecting stories in redder areas and more conservative areas, and at least in the United States, can be a really powerful way to help change, hearts and minds of potential allies, right? But even, perceptions that we have within our LGBT communities where we are everywhere, right? And so I think the work that you're doing is you're just at the beginning of really just kind of lifting up the stories that aren't heard enough. And I think that I'm excited for the work that you're doing. And one of the things when you're talking about, doing these live facilitated workshops, right, is I remember this really powerful moment. I was at Creating Change. I've gone to the conference a while, but I remember one of the first Creating Changes I ever went to, there was a workshop where all of the folks in the room, we had to, there was like a timeline of like when we were born, when we were first aware of someone who's LGBT in our community, when we started to become politicized around our identities, right? Because this is an activist conference. And, at the end of it, were like these amazing points in history that I didn't know, but truly lived in the memories of other folks in the room. And it just like, it was a testament to how much collectively we don't know about our history. And it really underscored work like what you're doing and work that is happening in states where they're mandating curriculum that is inclusive of LGBT people, but just because it's powerful. So with that, Wes, I'm really enjoying the conversation. We're going to jump to an advertisement. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about your LGBT identity in the world of business. So, hey, Outbosses, Rhodes Perry here. As you all know, part of my passion for this podcast is to empower you and fellow LGBT entrepreneurs to cultivate a feeling of purpose and belonging in your business. To know that you can show up and be the most authentic version of yourself. Purpose, belonging, and workplace culture are concepts I take seriously in my own consulting business. In fact, I'm on a mission to empower leaders just like you and those on their way to joining us to cultivate cultures of belonging. In my upcoming book, Belonging at Work, I share some of my personal struggles of coming out as a trans guy in the workplace and how I leverage this experience as one of my business superpowers. Now, I'm on a mission to support you in taking simple actions that will make a world of difference for anyone who has ever felt as if they needed to hide important aspects of themselves on the job. When you commit to purchasing a special, limited edition copy of the book, a portion of your purchase will support expanding workplace opportunities for fellow transgender and non-binary people. An added bonus, your story about what it means to belong at work will be featured on the book's website to inspire others. You're ready to belong at work now. To learn more, visit Rhodes on Amazon.com or text 444-999 and type the word belong. Again, that's Rhodes on Amazon.com or text 444-999 and type belong. So Wes, so now we're going to jump back into the conversation, and I wanted to chat with you a little bit about your own LGBT identity and how it shows up in the workplace. And you are the founder of the Generations Project, so you're setting the culture of your own organization. But I'm wondering if you can reflect on a time when you may have worked for someone else where it was difficult for you to be 100% out in the workplace. And if you can kind of share maybe one story that was a challenging time and how you worked around that, I think that definitely can help other folks who tune into the show and just have challenges at times of negotiating how out they can be, whether they're running their own business or they're working for someone else. So does something come to mind for you?
Yeah, I guess a few things. Well, I can just say to start, when I was younger, and I did come out young. I came out when I was 19, right after I graduated high school. But during high school, I was terrified to be gay. I actually thought that maybe I wouldn't ever tell anyone, and I would just live with it and find a way to hide it and make do. And I'm really glad it's come so far to be really proud to be gay and to really own it and find my own, I guess, 13 years later. But during that time, I worked a lot of jobs in high school. And, they're primarily in, I guess, the food industry. But I think I just always try to find I had a natural flamboyancy to me that I really tried to hide and maybe over masculinize myself and really just try to hide it. So I think I don't really have a particular story or any memory, but I definitely had no other choice but to hide it. And I remember when I decided to come out and make the move, my next job I had in the restaurant industry was in San Francisco, and I had a lot of gay and lesbian, trans coworkers, and some really great gay managers. But I worked there for 5 years, and I think third year, someone came from Iowa, and they hired him to be the general manager there, and he was really uncomfortable with gay people. It was really bizarre because this restaurant was in the Castro, and I was certainly out at the time, but I just remember being really uncomfortable again, just being around that energy. And I remember one time he called someone a faggot in front of me, and I just really got upset. And I had heard that all the time growing up in high school, like those type of words, but in college and living in San Francisco, you don't say that like in those communities. So I actually felt empowered enough to say something and just tell them that's not cool and not to say it. Like, I think that's all I said to the manager, but he like later came and gave me like a sincere apology. I guess that's my only real story that comes to mind about that.
No, that's very powerful. And I thank you for sharing it, because I mean, just that kind of arc of your own journey where you're talking about, 14 years ago, you're realizing, okay, I'm gay. There's a lot of anxiety around that, especially coming from a more rural community where literally being out can impact your life in really serious ways. And in the workplace, it's that job security piece. So I completely get what you're saying on that. And fast forward to that experience being in the food industry, which is pretty tough, right? I mean, I've never worked in the food industry, but I've heard enough people, I have friends who are chefs, where it can be a pretty sexist, pretty homophobic environment, right? And yet you found a pretty good place to be employed at in the Castro, and yet you kind of like culture clash of someone new coming into management. And it sounded like you had some positive gay role models as managers of just like how to be yourself in the workplace. And that gave you that confidence when something went sideways for you to just put that manager on notice, a really positive outcome. So I thank you for sharing that, because I think that can give other folks some confidence around, when you see something that is less than stellar in the workplace and you feel like you have fellow champions that have your back, and not everybody has that, right? So there are different scenarios there, but you were in a pretty good environment where you felt comfortable enough to put that person on notice. And I think that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of security, and it takes that support, in the workplace to know that you're not going to lose your job if you do that. And not everybody has that, right? So, and it's a journey, right? Like you certainly have evolved over time. So I really appreciate that story. This show is definitely about empowerment, and we have some pretty unique lived experiences being a part of the Rainbow family. I'm curious, like from those experiences, if you view being a part of the LGBT community as almost a way to set you apart as someone who's leading an organization as a superpower, like the experiences of having to share with other people your sexual orientation, that coming out process, which is a process that happens again and again and again. Is that maybe one example that can help you have confidence running an organization when you don't have all the answers? I mean, do you see some of those experiences helping you in the world of leading a nonprofit?
Yeah, well, I understand that LGBTQ people, gay people, are like 4 to 9 to 10% of the world's population. So we are like a really small population, and I know what it's like to feel alienated and alone, and like you're the only one coming from a town where there weren't any other gay people around. They were almost like a myth. And then moving to places where there were a lot of gay and LGBTQ people, and learning, it's a complicated community with a lot of different interests. But at the end of the day, we all share a common experience that unites us. And I think that is a really beautiful thing. And it really allows you to approach it however you'd like. There's so many different paths you can take being in the LGBTQ community. You can live your entire life on being LGBTQ and living wherever you'd like, feeling like you don't need to find your acceptance, because now we have same-sex marriage, but nationwide. But that still doesn't mean. I mean, we still have so much more to fight for. But I guess what I'm trying to say is just the power in having a community that has a shared experience of coming out and finding an identity that is not part of the social structure. I think that's the superpower. I think that's a really unique community to be a part of. And I think we're lucky. And if you're good to the community can be good to you. And I think a lot of us look out for one another and can help each other get ahead.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that what you're sharing is something that has come up from other guests as well, is this, the power of our communities how we show up for each other, have each other's backs. One of the pieces that a couple of our guests have shared in the past is, because of oppression, because of being treated differently, unfairly, inequitably, however you describe it, that there's this like resilience that comes from it, but also this piece of empathy. And I'm curious for you, have you thought about that piece of like this empathy muscle that it seems like we have defined a little bit more than maybe other folks because of being treated differently, that while we may not share the experiences of other folks who have experienced different forms of oppression, there is this ability where we can empathize in a way that might be a pathway if we could bottle that up and share that with the world, maybe the world would be a little bit different. But I'm curious, like, have you noticed that in yourself, especially as you've become more comfortable in your skin, where you have this ability to empathize with other folks who also have to deal with inequities for different reasons?
Yeah, well, I think being LGBTQ and really understanding the many different journeys our community has had really allows us to be empathetic. For me, it has anyway. And there are places in the country where gay or LGBTQ people are being killed for being gay or LGBTQ. So I'll try to never forget that and think about that when I live my life and try to value the experiences I'm able to have. And also through that, just knowing that gay and LGBTQ people are being killed in other countries, like I understand why someone would need to flee and why someone would need to be a refugee. And I think just being able to understand the struggles that many of us face, whether we're LGBTQ or for many other reasons, when life doesn't seem to be setting out a path of safety for us. I understand the story of someone who has to flee and find a safety net. So I think that just sort of understanding that makes me empathetic to all of the minorities that exist in the world, not just the LGBTQ community.
So on this piece of empathy, in your organization, what you do gives back to LGBT communities, right? Like you're collecting our stories, you're slowly building a more holistic kind of record of our collective history, right? So aside from that, right, are there ways inside your organization where you're thinking about, we are going to build these structures to give back to LGBT folks, especially LGBT communities at the margins, right? So, I think you kind of alluded to this in the beginning of, as you're building out more positions, really trying to center, okay, we want to hire younger people, we want to hire people of color, we want to hire more women, more trans folks, like however you're kind of structuring that around kind of greatest need. I mean, is that a part of your calculus right now of your organization and just trying to think about, aside from the stories themselves, this is how we're going to positively impact our community, or is that something that you're striving towards in the future?
Yeah, well, I really believe that intergenerational storytelling, a really great opportunity, not just to preserve our history, but also to build our community. And what I've learned is just through our storytelling workshops, which are free, and we create groups of 12 people of all ages, and the purpose is they meet once a week for 4 weeks to help each other through our curriculum develop a 5-minute story that they'll share on the final day of the workshop. And then from there, we plan storytelling shows inspired by those workshops. So just the process of building the community and leading, we're always leading towards the next thing. And then even if you miss the next thing, there's going to be something else after that. And just diversifying our programs themselves, like adding time capsule projects are more intimate and less speaking out loud and on stages. So if you are more comfortable just connecting with others and pulling photos and writing short memories and stories about those photos, we have projects like that we've developed. So, but yeah, building the community, it's really important to create different leadership positions for people who are leaders in the many different facets of the LGBTQ community. And I'm rather new to New York City, so I know most of my friend network is actually on the West Coast, but I happen to make a great network here of friends and colleagues in New York City, but it's really relies on each one reaching one, or each one reaching 100 if you're lucky. So that's really, I mean, just in creating that general understanding and that of we're all here to help pay homage to those who help pave a path for us. And then also, for us younger people anyway, and then, we also understand that we all age, and one day younger people will be older people, and what kind of community do we want to be a part of if we don't sort of create this energy in our community that's important to connect with older adults? Just learning from older adults too, like they have just as much of a desire to learn from us than we have to learn from them. So just a really grateful circle idea that resonates with most people if they just see it and believe it. So that's why we have these workshops and invite leaders from other organizations to do the workshops. And that's sort of how we're just building the organization. And most people who share their story with us either attend future events or share their story again, or help volunteer or help facilitate a workshop, or they stay involved somehow, or they join our board of directors.
Yeah. I think
that's how we grow.
Yeah. I mean, the impact that you're having, just like what seems most clear to me outside of the story collection itself, is giving our communities, not giving, but empowering our communities to find their voice and to share their story and to recognize the power of their story. And I think that is incredible. So Wes, just a couple of questions on mindset stuff. So when you first got started with this nonprofit, when you had the vision, there's so many things to do when you start up anything, but especially a business or a nonprofit. So how did you get past the feelings of, who am I? I'm not ready yet. I don't know if I'm good enough. I mean, did you have those feelings? Number one, are you human? Just checking in. But then two, like, how do you work around them when they pop up?
Yeah. So, well, for me, the driving force for this has always been passion. I don't think anyone could start a nonprofit if passion wasn't the driving force. I don't think as much knowledge or experience or connections you have, nothing will outdo your passion. So that's been the driving force. I think I've seen maybe hundreds of reasons to stop or to not start this project. There were so many things working against me, it felt like, and there was we throw free events, so there wasn't really any kind of model of raising money. We would throw great events that were really well received, and people would donate a little bit at the door, but there was not a ticket price or anything. So, there wasn't really any model to really sustain this project at all. So it really relied on speaking about these issues with people in the community and just sharing the passion I have and finding others with a similar passion to come together and sort of create this collective passion to get this off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you have to have passion.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to root yourself, if feelings of self-doubt pop up, it always goes back to, what is your why? Why did I start this? What's my vision? And when you remind yourself that this can have a positive, massive impact on many people who may have never realized the power of their voices, right, and their stories, I think that to me sounds like a motivator of okay, there's a bigger thing here, and it's not about me. It's about, strengthening our communities. And I think that's always super powerful. In terms of the 100 reasons to stop, right? And I'm sure those pop up all the time of I have no idea how to fix this or do this thing or whatever. When you encounter those kind of obstacles, is it hard for you to ask for help? And even if it is or if it isn't, who do you reach out to when you feel like you're stuck?
Well, I like to say, listen to the voice in your head that likes you, and try not to listen to the one who your saboteur, as my friend Kyle who hosts our Generations Project shows, would tell me. So, I grew up in a small town on the Oregon coast in a small radius of no other people. So it was a really isolated town, and I formed really great relationships growing up, and so I have a network of people I've known since I was 7 who I just call just to chat with. And I think that always grounds me, that I've maintained these relationships for so long. And they've been there through a lot of experiences I've had. And so I often call them and just talk to them. And sometimes even if I haven't spoken to them in a year or 2 or 3, I just call them because we've went through this weird experience growing up in the middle of nowhere. So I think, I could get comfort calling them. And luckily I have family members who I call to just to realign me with myself. But there are so many obstacles with starting your own practice or your own business or own nonprofit. So I think it's just really important to be okay with things going slow and understanding you're not perfect. I'm the type of person who will dwell on things that aren't perfect. I'm not a lot of things, and I just try not to focus on what I'm not, and I try to think about what I could do. And I understand I'm not. I understand I'm the type of person who really just needs to be okay with my imperfection and just sort of learn how to let things go and take a little time if you need to. If you have the passion and you have everything at least aligned to work, if you just put the time to it, then you're in a good place. You need to take time. Mental health is very important, and you need to take care of yourself. And I wholeheartedly believe it's really important to find others to talk to, and hopefully you can create a healthy balance of that, of learning when to talk to people, when to really just take things on yourself.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're right on with like identifying who those trusted kind of inner circle folks are. And I think like the fact that you're reaching out to your friends, like long-term friends and your family, and then also kind of keeping in mind that this is progress, not perfection. I think that's really key. So Wes, like only a few more questions now because we're about to wrap up the interview. And these next few questions are just meant to be our quick fire questions. So if you can answer them in like a word, a phrase, or a sentence at most, I think it'll help us and the audience really get a better sense of some of the things that really drive you. So on the first one, is this a fun one? So is there a historical figure that comes to mind that best describes your leadership style as an executive director of this organization?
Oh my gosh, I would say Marsha P. Johnson. Just at first, when I was first starting this, how eccentric she was.
Nice. That's a great example.
I'd like to say Harvey Milk. By the towards the end.
Yeah, I figured that would be a good question for you. You're thinking about LGBT history, so those are two amazing icons. So yeah, that's awesome. What's a daily habit that you have that helps you stay focused on what you're good at?
Well, I drink a lot of water. Nice. I wake up every day and drink like a full cup of water before I do most things and wait 20 minutes. So I just think that is I can't say I do that every morning, but I really try to like get that cup of water in and just kind of mosey around for 10 to 20 minutes. We'll let the water settle and get my body working. But just being mindful. Sorry, this is not a power answer.
That's okay. Hydration is key. And sometimes we forget that when we get busy. So I think that's an important reminder. Okay, so 2 more questions for you. And this one may require like a sentence. But can you share one piece of advice to inspire the next generation of outbosses to take that first entrepreneurial leap?
I think just do it.
Yeah.
No one's going to make you do it except for yourself.
Yeah, just to take action. And like what you had described before, you have passion, you are reminded of your why, and that's what drives you. And I think that's always a helpful reminder for listeners.
Set the intention and create a plan and just do it.
Awesome. Okay. So Wes, this is probably the easiest question of the day. Can you share one way that our audience can stay in touch with you and learn more about the Generations Project?
Yes. To learn more about the Generations Project, you can contact us through our website at thegenerationsproject.org. That's thegenerationproject.org. And if anyone would like to email me anytime, my email is wes@thegenerationsproject.info.
Awesome. And we will have that in the show notes. So Wes, thank you so much for joining us and for inspiring all of our LGBT entrepreneurs out there. For Outbosses, thank you again for tuning into this week's episode. It is always a privilege to connect with you and so many inspiring leaders like Wes. So for details from today's conversation, go ahead and check out the show notes at outentrepreneur.com. You can text all one word OUTBOSS to 444-999. Probably the easiest way to stay in touch with the show. As a next step, subscribe to the podcast, consider leaving a rating and review in iTunes, and be sure to share the show with a friend or a loved one. And as always, keep being your authentic selves 100% of the time.